Today, we'll talk about what the Toys R Us bankruptcy means for suppliers when dealing with Chapter 7 customers. Also, can customers actually dictate to suppliers how to run their business? Well, the Gap thinks so, and we'll look into what that means for the Gap and their suppliers. Additionally, we'll take a look at Tungsten Network's analytics offering for accounts receivable, next on this edition of the Savvy Report. Hi everyone, I'm Ernie Martin, founder and managing director of Receivable Savvy, and welcome to this week's edition of the Savvy Report. You may have recently read that Toys R Us is in liquidation mode after its Chapter 7 bankruptcy filing. What you may not be aware of is what suppliers are dealing with in the face of this bankruptcy. Initially, Toys R Us filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in September of 2017, with the idea that they would be able to restructure and emerge a better and stronger company in 2018. Well, two things happened on their way to implementing this plan. First, enormous debt was too much to overcome for Toys R Us, and second, the holiday season was a bit underwhelming and didn't result in enough revenue to fix many of their issues. Because of that, Toys R Us had to convert their bankruptcy filing from Chapter 11, which is more of a protection, giving organizations an opportunity to restructure, to Chapter 7, which is essentially going out of business. What did the Chapter 7 filing mean for suppliers? Well, many of these organizations who provided Toys R Us with merchandise prior to the holiday season will not be paid, nor will many of them receive their merchandise back. Toys R Us, because of the nature of Chapter 7, can liquidate the merchandise they have to complete their going out of business process. Well, needless to say, suppliers were furious, and understandably so, since many of the suppliers negatively impacted by the change in bankruptcy filing include companies such as Lego, who's owed about $30 million, MGA Entertainment, which makes the venerable Little Tikes products and something called LOL Surprise Dolls, whatever that is. They're owed about $21 million. And then there's Playmobil. They're out $500,000. Well, to me, that's a lot of money. And this is no small thing for suppliers when a large customer goes bankrupt. Many suppliers will be out their revenue as well as their merchandise. So what's a supplier to do? Well, there are 5 things suppliers should always consider to help mitigate the unfortunate reality that sometimes customers do go out of business. First, suppliers should always diversify customer portfolios. Because the economic climate can be unpredictable, uncertain, it's important for suppliers to operate their organizations with the assumption that all revenue is at risk. Securing new customers that are different in terms of size, scope, and location is necessary to spread the risk. And by the way, expanding into markets internationally can often be an effective hedge against domestic economic uncertainty. If one company hits a rough patch, then healthy customers can help make up the shortfall and allow the supplier to weather the storm. Second, every supplier should develop and implement a written credit policy. Developing a credit policy should be a strategy that every company, and I mean every company, incorporates in order to control the risk it assumes when extending payment terms to its customers. In our 2017 perception study, we discovered only 69% of respondents had a comprehensive written credit policy. If your organization doesn't have one, then put one together. We have an ebook that covers how to develop a written credit policy on our website at receivablesavvy.com. Third, use credit groups. Credit groups consist of companies that join together to help member companies within a particular industry exchange information about customers and their payment experience when dealing with those customers. Credit groups can be a local, regional, and national in nature. Next, supplier organizations should consider a cash-on-delivery policy. This may be a challenge when dealing with customers the size of a Toys R Us per se, but for smaller companies, it's worth considering. COD can also be used strategically for certain deliveries or for certain customers who don't meet a particular financial threshold. And finally, consider invoice financing options. The difference between getting paid and not getting paid at all from a customer facing bankruptcy can be a matter of a few short days. An organization doesn't necessarily have to take early payment on all outstanding invoices, but with those strategic, critical to your organization invoices, getting paid early via supply chain financing, factoring, or other methods is a good tool to have at your disposal. Can a customer dictate to their suppliers how they should run their business? That's the question being asked after the Gap has instructed its Tier 1 suppliers, representing about 800 factories in about 30 countries or so, to pay its garment workers digitally rather than with cash. This move coincides with the Gap joining the United Nations-based Better Than Cash Alliance. Now, per the Alliance's website, the organization is a partnership of governments, companies, and international organizations that accelerate the transition from cash to digital payments in order to reduce poverty and drive inclusive growth. The Gap has instituted this change in order to increase digital payments across companies' global supply chain and positively impact the lives of more than 1 million garment workers. According to David Hayer, Senior Vice President of Global Sustainability at the Gap, he says by having the Gap suppliers pay garment workers digitally, the company aims to accelerate the transition towards a more transparent workplace for the women and men who make up the factoring of making up their clothes, stating that it's a win-win for garment workers and factories alike. While this is generally good for garment factory workers and for those helping to participate in the digital economy, should the Gap tell its suppliers how they should pay their employees? I guess the issue is really not so much whether the Gap can or should do this. The real issue is whether there is measurable quality improvement with merchandise delivered by suppliers by instituting this requirement. It'll be interesting to see if the Gap suppliers will do this, and if they choose not to, will the Gap then find other suppliers who will? My guess is that that's exactly what the Gap will do, and honestly, they have every right to source the products they sell in their stores any way they see fit. The supplier doesn't have to comply, for good or bad, depending on how you look at it, but that depends on what side of the fence you're on. What are your thoughts on this matter? Let us know what you think in the comments section on our website, LinkedIn, or on YouTube. Tungsten Network is now offering analytics capability to its accounts receivable dashboard, allowing its 300,000 customers to have greater insight into their cash flow and manage their finances more effectively. The dashboard features 4 components. First, an overview showing how receivables are progressing. Second, credit control, which allows businesses to identify how their invoices are progressing. Third, tax reporting, which helps businesses determine the correct tax rate for their invoices. And finally, 4, a deep dive, enabling businesses to build and download customizable detailed invoice reports. Andrew Nichols, head of Tungsten Network Analytics, says, if you can't track invoices in real time, real issues arise, and this ultimately causes friction in the supply chain that can lead to serious and major problems. So good for Tungsten for adding this feature to their offering, but it does bear watching though. So we'll be sure to keep an eye on this and see how it performs for supplier customers over the long term. Well, that's it for this week's Savvy Report. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.